Surgery has evolved during the 20th century due to many important advances. Anesthesia, antisepsis and infection control, and standards of competency. Vascular surgery arose in this wave of progress due to several milestones. The first being general medical care and critical care improved. This resulted in longer lifespans, with more seniors with symptomatic vascular disease alive and able to tolerate surgery. The second milestone in vascular surgery was the development of the Dacron graft. The third was improved diagnostic testing, both invasive and non-invasive. And finally, the Fogarty catheter. This opened the door to endovascular surgery. Recently, the Society for Vascular Surgery has decided to sponsor an audiovisual archive to feature the outstanding leaders and contributors to the specialty of vascular surgery. A committee chaired by Jimmy Yao with Norm Rich and me was formed to undertake these interviews. Dr. Peter Lawrence, Mark Eskandari, and Walt McCarthy, as well as Melina Kibbe, were added to the committee. Dr. Cal Ernst has served as consultant. My name is Roger Gregory, and together with Melina Kibbe and Jimmy Yao, we will be conducting an interview today with the legendary innovator and surgeon, Dr. Tom Fogarty. Tom, on behalf of SVS, thank you for agreeing to this interview. Let's start in your early days. You were born and raised in Cincinnati, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
When was that?
Downtown Cincinnati.
Downtown Cincinnati. When was that? What year were you born?
1934.
And you were born into an Irish Catholic family.
Yes.
With an older brother and sister. Tell me about your father.
Well, you really want to know the truth?
Yeah.
He was a drunken Irishman.
What?
He was. But a nice one. He died when I was very young, but what I knew of him...
How old was he when he died?
He was about 50, actually. 50.
And you were how old?
I think I was 7.
Now, the family business was said to be hotel and liquor store management. Is that true?
That is true.
And also that he was a railroad mechanic.
Yes.
And dabbled in engineering.
Yeah, he was a railroad engineer, but not the engineer driving the machine. But they actually had railroad engineering schools like they have aeronautical schools. And so he went to a railroad engineering school in Ohio, which later became University of Dayton, Ohio.
Did that have an influence on you, or were you too young to realize what he was doing? Or?
No, I was really too young to realize what he was doing, and most of my early childhood, he didn't work much, and except he worked in saloons.
Okay, that's fair enough. So, I think it's fair to say that in your early years, money was a little tight.
It was real tight, yes.
Is that true?
Yeah, no, it's true. My mother was left with 3 kids, and in those days, women, when they worked, they were paid very little. And so she worked, she was actually worked in a sweatshop, a dry cleaning store, and she did everything from the accounting to the billing to running the steamer to doing the sewing. And whatever was needed, she did it in the sweatshop.
With tight finances, early on, you were kind of forced into things that most other kids your age were not, such as making your own toys.
Yes, yeah. We were making our own toys, trying to repair things that were broken around the house.
What was your mother like?
She was a very tough German lady.
Tough on you?
She was tough on everybody, you know, and she had to be. I mean, having 3 kids, very little finances, you had to watch what we were doing and what we were spending, what we were stealing, the whole spectrum.
Now, she had you fix some things around the house, too, is
Yes,
that right?
yeah.
How did she know you could do that?
Well, I don't think she did, but she figured it out at some point in time. So, and I kind of like to do it. You know, I just like to fix things.
Is it fair to say that from an early age you were mechanically minded?
That's fair.
Okay. Now, tell us about your soapbox derby cars, particularly the one you built at age 11 called the Flying Irishman. I think we might have a picture of that even.
Well, there is, yeah. It didn't fly. It did roll. Okay, but
Did you win with it?
I won the Cincinnati thing, and then when you won that, you went to Akron, Ohio, and I lost in the first heat in Akron.
Wow. So early on you knew what losing was about.
Yes, I did. I think it's good experience to lose.
Yeah. So obviously you like to have some fun.
I did.
And you like to win.
I'd like to win.
Okay. About this same time, somehow you got this nickname, Spider.
Yes.
How did that come about?
I looked like a spider. I had very, I had very, very skinny extremities, and so they kind of said,
I can't believe that.
Now what?
"No, I can't either."
Now, also you did.
Look at me now.
You did some Golden Gloves boxing, is
Yes,
that right?
yeah.
And what is that story about? You were kind of down in the first 2 rounds of a fight, and your brother wanted to throw in the towel,
Yes,
and you told him, "Don't throw in the towel."
yes.
What'd you tell him?
I said, "I'll get him."
And the next round you did.
Yeah, I did. I'll never forget the kid's name. It was Thomas Woosty, a German and an Irishman.
So from an early time also, I think it's fair to say that you didn't like to be pushed around.
No,
You think that's carried over?
it has. Much to the consternation of many.
At age 12, you had the miraculous idea of building a model flying wing airplane that actually flew. Is that right?
It didn't fly too well, but it did fly.
The fact that it flew at all is more than many aeronautical companies are able to accomplish now.
Well, that is true to an extent, but there is one flying wing that flies.
Beside the Fogarty wing.
Yeah, and actually it was used for what I was thinking about using it for. You know, you had all this space in the wings and the tail, and it occurred to me you could carry stuff in that, cargo.
Okay.
And so I thought it would have some utility.
But that's not one of your patents.
No, I didn't know anything about patents at that age.
But clearly, your engineering and inventive nature became obvious early in your career, early in your life. Tell us about grammar school. Where did that come from?
Grammar school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was interesting. We're an Irish family. My mother was German, but she had an Irish name, and everybody assumed we were Irish, and we were. And I went to a school called St. Boniface, which is a German school, okay? And there was very close to the German school was a St. Patrick's school, where all the Irish kids went. So I was about the only Irish kid in the German school. And so they kept harassing me, and I didn't like that. But they kept saying, "Get out here, get down to that St. Patrick's place." So when I found myself in fights a lot,
You?
unfortunately.
Well, was this a public school?
Well, there were Catholic schools, and I guess there were private schools. Catholic schools had no support other than the parishioners. So they had no state support, no community support.
Okay. Now, in high school, you went to Roger Bacon,
Yes,
and this is when you decided you wanted to motorize your bike.
yes.
Tell us about the clutch you invented.
Well, it should be we invented. There's one of the kids in the school, once again, was a German. He was what we you would call an egghead now, but back then we called them pinheads. And so
Is that the same as a nerd?
it's a nerd. It's equivalent to a nerd. No, it's equivalent to a nerd.
Okay.
And so they were strange people. He was strange, and nobody liked him. He was a big kid, and I think most of the kids didn't mess around with me because they knew I could box, and I trained boxing at a very early age. And so he became a friend, and he was brilliant. And so he had a Cushman motor scooter, and they were mechanical clutches, but there were only two gears. One was low and one was high. So if you were in high and you were going up the hill, and he happened to have one of these, he was the only rich kid in the neighborhood because his father was a dentist. And so I got to liking him and liking his motor scooter, and he'd take me where he went, and you would sit on the rear end of this thing, and he would be on the front end. You're going up, start to go up a hill in high, and at some point in time you hit a shift into low, and when you shift into low, the guy in the rear found his ass 10 yards behind the motor scooter. So that's recognizing a need, recognizing a problem.
Right.
So we started thinking, how can we fix this? And I had a maintenance job in a small machine shop where you swept up the filings and that stuff. And the machinist allowed me to use the machines. And so they taught me how to use them, and we made essentially what is now a centrifugal clutch. And it worked, and we put that on the scooter with the help of the machinist. But Pinhead and I did most of the work.
Now, this also ended up on a few golf courses.
Oh yeah, no. Any of the any small motor has usually some form of centrifugal clutch on it now, and so it can be any horsepower motor, probably less than 15 at that time, 15 horsepower. So you could run different things on it. I don't think they had any motorized lawnmowers back then, but you'll find that type of motor. And usually it's a Briggs & Stratton on those. And that's the first one we put this on, was a Briggs & Stratton.
You were doing all these things, and yet in high school you made poor grades. That doesn't fit. Why?
I think it does fit. And for me, it was just fine, you know. No, I think a lot of kids are so interested in things other than didactic education. And I was one of those. So if I was in school, I was usually doing something I shouldn't be doing because I got bored.
Thinking about other things?
Yeah.
Okay. Going back to the centrifugal clutch and the Cushman motor scooter. Tom, did you patent this or?
No, I didn't know enough to patent it. And if I patented it, I wouldn't have owned it. There's such a thing as called shop rights. And it's equivalent to what a lot of universities do. You develop something in a university, they have shop rights. Equivalent. Now, I don't think they call them that anymore, but they do. And so they either have all of what you did or some of it, or sometimes none of it.
So they steal it from you. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
Is that the wrong
no,
question?
they purloined.
Oh, okay.
No, it makes some sense, but it certainly doesn't make sense to take the whole kit and caboodle. And some do that, some don't, and some are split it, and it's equitable.
Now, at age 14, you got a job at the Good Samaritan Hospital,
Yes.
first cleaning up medical equipment, and later you were promoted to scrub tech. Here you met.
Jack Cranley.
Right. Now, we'll come back to him later, but he played a huge role in your life
He did.
and was just a fabulous influence
Yes.
in
Very
all
positive.
respects. After you finished high school, you were recommended to college on probation
Yes.
because of your poor performance in high school.
Yes.
But in 1952, you went to Xavier. Ohio, for college. And actually, how did you do there?
I did well, and I was quite concerned. I never studied in grade school or high school, so I didn't know if I could study. And if I studied, did I learn anything?
Right.
So that was a concern. I finally got a little bit serious. It worked out, actually. The first test we took was in theology, and the teacher was a Jesuit, and he was known to be very tough. He had tough tests to take. So I think there were 22 in the class, and after the test, he announced the grades. He didn't announce them, but we came and said, you know, you guys are really stupid. And I said, whoa. But anyway, I was included in that stupid group. But he said there's only one guy that passed, and it was me.
Wow.
So I figured maybe I hid something up here. But so that was my experience at Xavier. It was very positive.
You told us that finances were really tough. Now, how did you finance college?
Essentially, I worked all the time.
The story is that you had 3 jobs, is that right?
Yeah, that's what I mean, worked all the time. I had 3, sometimes 4.
How could you do that?
I just did it.
You were an x-ray tech, you were the night shift orderly, an OR tech.
Yeah.
Now, how could you possibly do that and still go to class?
I just did it. Yeah, that's all I can say. I just did it.
I don't know a question to follow that, Tom. That's just incredible. But we will come back to that later when I want to talk about some other things about what you've done, consciously or unconsciously. And as obviously a pattern here that you're developing of progress despite limited finances or funding, which
Yes.
is very important in your career.
Yes.
Now, you graduated in 1956 with a BS in biology.
Yes.
Why not engineering?
You know, my brother was an engineer, and he tried to encourage me to be an engineer. I think the influence of working in a hospital made me look to something outside of boxing, which had been my...
Were you going to be a middleweight, Tom, or
No.
welterweight? Or
No, lightweight.
lightweight, okay.
Yeah. But anyway, and I actually had some professional fights.
As Spider?
No, I don't think they call me Spider by then. They call me the Irish Kid.
Oh, okay.
Well, so let me segue then into your medical education. So you were just touching on that. Here you are, you worked your way through college, you have this past history of already inventing, you were a boxer. Explain to us how you came to the decision to actually go to medical school, because that's a pretty important decision in your life.
Well, it was primarily because of Dr. Cranley. That he took a liking to me when I was an orderly. He couldn't figure out what a kid was doing cleaning Walgensteins. You probably don't even know what a Walgenstein is.
I actually do.
You do? You don't?
I actually do.
Oh, good. Well, it was my job to clean those. And I did a very good job at it. In fact, I developed a solution of ether and green soap to clean these things, and it worked real well. The interesting thing about it, I'd get on the bus to go home, and everybody would be sniffing. Because ether sticks with you. So I always sat in the back. But anyway, it was Dr. Cranley's influence, and he kept encouraging me to quit boxing and to get into college and go to med school.
And what kind of physician was Dr. Cranley?
He was a vascular surgeon,
Okay.
one of the first in the country, along with giants.
And when you first decided to go to medical school, was the intent that you were going to become a surgeon, or did you have another specialty in mind?
No, I didn't. I liked what vascular surgeons did, but I was open enough to say I got to figure out what these other people do. And so I took what they call a rotating internship. I don't think there's many of them left now. But I took a rotating internship. I actually thought I wanted to be a cardiologist. And I was on that service. And that time they really didn't have coronary care units. All the people you thought were going to die, you put in one big room. And you took care of them. It was a 24-hour shift, essentially. And I figured out I didn't want to do that because the experience was somebody die or they were in real trouble. They'd run down the hall and get the EK machine and hook them up. The cardiologists would come around and they'd fiddle and try to figure out what kind of arrhythmia it was. And while they were fiddling and figure things out, the patient died. I said, I don't want to do that. So I looked at surgery. I thought about pediatrics because I enjoyed pediatric surgery. And at that time, it was pretty simple. They didn't really have many specialists in the area. But I liked the challenge because they were difficult to take care of post-procedure almost all the time. Then I had a rotation on cardiac surgery. I liked that. Surgeon was very prominent, and he was a good guy. His name was Albert Starr.
Wow.
He developed the Starr-Edwards valve. Albert Starr was, in many ways, a very good mentor, in other ways not so good. One of the things I didn't appreciate or like is that he would charge patients for to get them in the hospital. So he had his money before he did his surgery. I thought that was unusual. In other ways, he was a fantastic mentor. He's a superb technician, took great care of patients, and I certainly admired that and took a lot of lessons from him. So he was a good mentor in many ways. You know, when you reflect on that, that's much more common now in all the specialties, not just plastic. They're outside of that. A lot of the orthopods do that. So.
Really?
Oh yeah,
I
at
wonder
least on the
when.
West Coast.
Wow. Okay.
Well, let me get you back about medical school. So you went to Cincinnati College of Medicine.
Yes.
You entered in 1956. Now, similar to college, how did you finance your medical school?
I worked my way through, and Dr. Cranley helped financially. He gave me money.
Did you work for him though? For
Yeah,
that
I
money?
did. No, I used to babysit for his kids.
You were a babysitter. Let's add that to your list.
Yeah, and you know, I painted the stripes on his parking lot in his office that he had. Whatever needed to be done, I did. I used to schedule the surgeries.
Oh, wow.
I worked in the office. I used to pick the anesthetist. He told me what group he'd work with or what person he'd work with and who he wouldn't work with. So I did those kinds of things.
So then you were telling us about why you decided not to pursue cardiology, but at this point you're finishing medical school and you've made your decision to go into surgery. Did you know at this point you wanted to do vascular surgery, or did you just know surgery in general?
I don't know if I really mentated what I wanted to do. I certainly respected Dr. Cranley and his colleagues, and got to see enough surgery to understand that was a big challenge.
Okay, so
And I like challenges.
in 1960 you then started your internship at University of Oregon.
Yes.
How did that come about, University of Oregon?
I was to Oregon once. I was on a diving team. Coca-Cola used to have big diving teams in Cincinnati. University of Cincinnati always had very big diving teams, and actually two of the individuals I knew, and they were my counselors when I was bad, but they were championship divers and were in the Olympics. And so the counselors were at a place called Fort Scott. And they used to send me out there to keep me out of trouble. And so they taught me how to swim. I was good at it, and I was a better diver. And they had a competition on the West Coast, Oregon specifically. So I got out there and I liked it.
And this is how you chose where to do your internship?
Well, once again, it was a relationship with Dr. Cranley. He knew Dr. Dunphy, who was a very prominent individual, and he just got an appointment as professor of surgery in Oregon. So he said, why don't you go to Oregon? And I did interview at Hopkins and a couple other places. I got accepted to Hopkins. But when I visited there, I didn't like it. at all. They had this pyramid program, and I think it was a 7-year program or something like that, and I just didn't want to do that, so
So you went to Oregon.
I went to Oregon.
Now, you did something else that was interesting. After being an intern for just 1 year, I understand you then went and did a fellowship in
Yeah.
peripheral vascular disease. Tell us about that.
Well, I did, and that was with Dr. Cranley. But what happened in Ohio, when you graduate from medical school, you can practice medicine. That's what went on in Ohio. I was in Oregon, and they sent me a notice to report for draft. And so Dr. Dunphy was pretty high up in the reserve, and so he got me off so I could finish the internship. And so the draft board told me I would be drafted right after I finished my internship. So I went back to Ohio and expecting to be drafted. And I wasn't drafted, but while I was laggy-dogging, doing nothing, Dr. Cranley says, come and work with us. And so I did. And that time, I was allowed to be a assistant. So I would assist him at different procedures he would do, and they were all vascular. So then I knew I'm going to be a vascular surgeon.
And was it, we're going to talk about this more in depth later in the second hour, but is this the time period when you started to develop the idea for the embolectomy catheter?
You know, actually, there were two ideas that I was working on, actually, before that, when I was in medical school. One is the clamps we had at that time were rigid clamps, and sometimes you clamp an artery, you hear it crack. And that wasn't too good. And often you had to open it up and deplug the plaque and start an endarterectomy. It was not a very pleasant thing to go when you're expecting to get something done fairly easily. So I came up with the concept, well, let's make something that will displace. So I built something that was a fluid-filled jacket. So the water would displace in response to an attempt to clamp. So it kind of sealed it off. So that's the first thing I did. And I think I was in college when I did that. And then about the time, I can't remember, about the time I was leaving medical school, Dr. Cranley turned to me one day and said, Tom, we got to fix this, and I'll help you. And that was the origin of the balloon catheter. When we tried to do a thrombectomy or an embolectomy, there's 3 operations. One is the first one, and then there was a redo to get what you didn't get out, and the third one was an amputation. And that happened about 50% of the time. So
your idea came from medical school, your medical school experience.
yes.
Okay, and we're gonna talk about that again in a little bit.
Well, it was the experience with Dr. Cranley, really. I actually was a scrub technician at Cincinnati Children's, too, and I'd see Altamar come over. And they used that as their private practice, that hospital.
But I'd say it was your ability to recognize the problem, and that's, I think, half the battle, that you recognize this problem and start thinking of a potential solution. And that's very unique about you.
It should be unique about everybody.
So let's go back to your residency. You then went back to Oregon in 1962, and you finished your residency in 1965, and then you did another fellowship. This time was at the NIH?
Yeah, at the NIH, and that was in cardiac surgery. And at that time, the NIH had clinical programs. They don't have those anymore, but they would take patients. Often they were very difficult patients that were sent in by referral. And so I spent 2 years there, and there I really learned. We rotated onto cardiology. And it was a time when they were just starting to do catheter diagnostics and things like transeptals. And so I actually, when I ended up back going to Stanford, transeptals were not very often done. And I ended up teaching a cardiologist how to do transeptals. Now it's kind of come full circle. Very few cardiologists can do transeptals because they're not trained on them. Now recently, with some of the less invasive cardiac catheter-mediated procedures, they're doing transeptals again. So it's kind of an evolution that is interesting, which you see not infrequently in field of surgery.
So now after your NIH fellowship, this is the time when I think you got your first job. Is that correct? And what was that?
NIH fellowship, I got my first job.
No, after that. After the...
Yeah, no, that was 2 years out of my residency to go to the NIH. Then I went back to finish my senior year at Oregon, which I did.
Okay. And then did you get your first job?
I don't think I've ever worked. I don't know what you mean by job, actually.
You started as an instructor of surgery
Oh,
at
yeah.
Stanford in 1969?
Yeah.
You don't consider that your first job?
I guess. Yeah.
Many would.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Okay, tell me about that. How did you end up at Stanford?
Well, I ended up at Stanford simply because, once again, another mentor at the NIH, and he called the chairman of the cardiac surgery, which was Shumway, and said, "This is a good kid." And Shumway had been telling him, "You get a good kid, I want to take a look at him." So anyway, that I ended up down there because of Glenn Morrow, and he was the chairman of the division of cardiac surgery at the NIH. So once again, it was a relationship. And, both those individuals end up being mentors.
Lifelong mentors.
Yeah.
Very good. And we're going to touch on that also later, too. Now, after you were an instructor, you had then advanced in Stanford as being an assistant professor. That was from 1970 to 71, and then you became an assistant clinical professor of surgery. And then there's an interesting period where I want you to talk about your thoughts on academics versus private practice, because it appears as though you may have made a switch at one point. So you originally started in academics, so I want to ask you why, how did you make that decision, and then what happened, your evolution of thought there?
None of this was planned, is what you should understand. People said you planned your career well. That's not true. I did not plan my career. I planned and figured out what I wanted to be. Okay, I don't think that's planning your career. And then I ended up places where I just was able to optimize the experience. I ended up essentially with an early fellowship because I was going to be drafted. And I didn't plan that. And Dr. Dunphy called him and said, "You got to leave this kid alone." And that worked. Then I went to did a good experience at Oregon. I ended up at the NIH, and that was an interesting story because I was interested in some cardiovascular physiology, so I went to Dunphy, and you could take a year or two out to do that. And he said, "Oh, I'll get you in back." And I said, "I want to work with Rushmer." At that time, he wrote a book on cardiovascular physiology, and he was in the state of Washington. And I said, "I want to go to Washington." He said, "I'll take care of it." Well, I ended up with the wrong Washington. He was talking about Washington, D.C. Now, that was not planned, okay? But when I found out what was going on, I said, "No, I want to go to state of Washington with Rushman." He says, "You go where I tell you." So that's how I ended up in the NIH.
Sounds like a lot of your career to this point is reacting to circumstances.
I think it is.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting pattern, actually, with your early career, for sure. But now you didn't touch on the private practice versus academics.
I'd worked with Dr. Cranley. He was a private practitioner with a clinical appointment at the University of Cincinnati. And I saw what goes on in both camps, and I really preferred really taking care of patients. And that goes on in some universities. I didn't enjoy it as much, and it may have been because of the experience at Cincinnati. Cincinnati is full of Germans, and they're very rigid, and I have never responded to rigidity.
Really?
I was just going to say the same thing.
And so then at Stanford, it was pretty much the same thing. Shumway was pretty generous, but only within certain limits. And really what happened there was an interesting situation. Once again, totally unplanned. Shumway did not like deans. And so the dean was always taking what he considered his money and giving it to somebody else. And so he said, Tom, you go out in private practice. And here's what we'll do. And I went out there with he was a resident at that time. And then he came on the faculty with me. And so we were the first two faculty members that Shumway ever had, really. And so we went out into private practice. And as it turned out, Shumway said he was going to follow. He decided not to. We ended up doing more surgery than he did within 2 years. And of course, he didn't like that.
So it sounds like your drive to go into private practice was more so that you could take care of patients
Yes.
in an unobstructed
Yes,
way.
yes.
Now, but what about the other side of you, the inventor side of you? Were you actively working on ideas and developing and engineering ideas at this point, or were you strictly focused on patient care at this point?
No, primarily a physician that happens to be an inventor. And you can use invention to benefit your patients. So that was what happened. And as when I was at the NIH, I developed, along with an individual by the name of Warren Hancock, what's called a Hancock valve, was the first tissue valve.
Was this the porcine valve?
Yeah.
Right.
And when I got back to Stanford, I used it back there. So I don't think there's a real separation from what I do as a surgeon who happens to invent. They're the same.
And did you feel that you could do that better in a private practice setting?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, when you think of how many committees do you think you have in an academic setting?
I don't know, tell me.
Well, I can tell you, to get through the IRB at Stanford, there's no fewer than 12 committees, and they act serially, not simultaneously. They got a committee to check on the committees, to make sure the committees are doing what they're supposed to do. Now, if that ain't bullshit, all that tells you is you got too many committees.
True. So in private practice, you felt that you could take your ideas to fruition more easily?
Yes.
That's interesting. Okay.
I mean, it's really, the comparison is so large, it's hard to estimate unless you've done in both of those communities, academic and private.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit. Tell me about your marriage. When did you meet your wife?
I met my wife in the record room at the University of Oregon. And the next meeting we had, I took her out to pizza. And it was a place called the Old Lompoc. And in Ohio, they have percentage of beer, one is 6.0 and the other is 3.2. Well, in Oregon, it's only 3.2, I thought. You know, so, but we ended up getting 6.0 as a pizza parlor. And BATF came in and flopped down their badge and said, show me your ID. And
Were you of age?
no, but my wife wasn't. She wasn't my wife then, she was my girlfriend.
Right.
So I ended up going to jail with her.
On your second, is this your second date?
I was second or third, it was very early.
Oh my gosh.
I hadn't kissed her yet, that's all I know.
You went to jail for her. Wow.
And I met her father on the court steps.
Oh, that went really well, I'm
No,
sure.
it did, actually.
So how long did you court your girlfriend before she became your wife?
You know, I think it was about 3 years.
3 years. And you've had children.
Yes.
4 children.
Yes.
Tell me your children's names.
The oldest is Tommy, and he runs a winery. The second one is Patrick.
Wait, let's stop there. Runs a winery. Can you
Yeah.
tell us which winery he runs?
Yeah, it's called Thomas Fogarty Winery.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he runs that and doing a great job. And my second son is independently wealthy. Wow. And he does what he wants.
Which son is this, Jonathan or Thomas?
Patrick.
Patrick.
Patrick. And
Independently wealthy, how?
how? Mm-hmm. When I start companies, and when I start companies, I'd make part of a company, put it in their portfolio, and he managed his portfolio very well, and ended up some of these small companies that were bought by big companies, and we took stock in the big companies. So he just was smart enough to hang on to most of it.
Very nice.
Yeah. But he works. What he does, he bought a piece of property from the estate. And essentially, it's a beautiful piece of property. It sits up on a ridge. And from one side, you see the ocean. The other side, you see San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And he's getting the land in shape. He is fixing one house. He probably won't sell, but he likes to fix things, which is interesting.
Takes after his father.
Yeah.
Okay, that's your second born.
Yeah. Now, my second born is actually my daughter.
Oh, so, okay, we're going out of order.
Yeah, Heather. And she was a very good horse lady, liked to ride horses, and she was actually very good. It was Grand Prix jumping, and she won the Canadian Grand Prix.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And she was on the junior Olympic team.
Wow.
And she never got interested in boys, which is very unusual. The boys walked behind the horses. That was it. So anyway, what she does now, she has one daughter. What she does now is she trades and sells horses for other people.
Wow.
So people will point her to go find them a horse, a jumper or a hunter, and she goes offshore and picks horses and brings them back.
She's a horse scout.
I guess she is a horse scout.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, but now she's older and she doesn't do that anymore. We got a grandkid, a little girl. That's
How many total grandchildren do you have?
5.
Oh, wow.
But we just started.
Well, when you have one more child to tell me about.
Yeah, John. He's the youngest. He's a boy. He was interested in agriculture, and he's got a degree in it. He became interested in car racing. Actually, his older brother drug him into it. But John is really well coordinated. And his older brothers, when something difficult had to be done, they called John. And John was like 5, and they were 8 and 14, the other guys. Well, he is the one that they made do the hard things. So he's really athletically inclined. He's not big, but he really is well coordinated. And so anyway, I think that really allowed him to become a very good race car driver. And he's good enough to become a professional. And what that means is I don't have to pay for anything.
So is he professionally racing right now?
Yeah, he is, yeah.
What would be a race that I would recognize?
Daytona 500.
Okay, I clearly recognize
Yeah.
that. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Tom, there are 3 focus areas that we'd like to discuss about your career and things that you've done. The first, and perhaps the most important to talk about, is the embolectomy catheter. Now, we touched on this a little bit in some of the earlier parts of this interview, but why did you choose thromboembolic disease? Why not ruptured aneurysms to solve? Why did you choose that? Was it the background that you talked about in the pathophysiology resulting in 50% mortality? Were there other reasons that you wanted to work on an embolectomy catheter?
Dr. Cranley just turned to me one day and said, this is a real problem. I said, it is, isn't it? Something like that. And he says, well, I'll help you. You go fix this, I'll help you. And he did. So it wasn't, I knew this was a horrible problem because I saw so many procedures because I worked for Dr. Cranley. And I had been thinking about there has to be a better way to do this. So I was thinking about that. And then I think one of the amputations one day, he says, this is happening all the time. I said, it's obvious. I was rather curt even at a young age, but he said, let's fix it. And so, and he continued, I'll help you. And think about it. So I thought about it, and I made the balloon catheter. That was one time when a light bulb went off. That doesn't happen often. But you see these cartoons,
Right.
and the idea. And that was one that really happened.
Now, you were fiddling around in the attic with ties and taking the end of a glove off.
Yes.
Is this how it all started?
Yeah. In fact, yeah, it was very simple. I stole a ureteral catheter,
Yeah.
and I took a number 5 glove, and I cut the fingertip of the baby finger, and tied it onto a ureteral catheter that was used. And then he made me bench test it.
With?
They were long, skinny hypo tubes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd get a citrated blood and blood bank when it expired and make that clot. And I'd put it in there and I'd pull it out.
You never used Jell-O?
No, I used Jell-O after that. It was easier to make, and it had the consistency of a clot. I've done a lot with Jell-O.
Now, you used this clinically when? When was the first time you used it clinically?
1959 or 60.
Was this when you were with
Cranley.
Cranley?
That's when I got back,
Right.
yeah, with Cranley for that 1 year.
Did he like it?
Oh, yeah. You know, there's certain phrases that happen when you really observe something interesting, and his comment was, "Oh, shit."
Meaning it really worked.
It really worked. We used to take them out and you get bits and pieces. Well, the whole cast of the artery came out with this thing, and it was amazing. You'd put it out on a tile, and you'd squirt some water, you'd see all the branches. You'd see the contour of the clot on top and the taper at the end, and you could actually tell I got it all.
At that time when you did it, this is 1960, did you just do it? Did you tell the patient about it? Did you have to get IRB approval? What was the process back then?
Well, the process, number one, there was no medical device amendment. Okay, so with a device, you didn't need FDA approval. The way it worked, you came up with the concept, you went and talked to the division chief of surgery, and he would say, do this, or do nothing, but he'd tell you what to do, and then he'd allow you to use it. So it was real simple. And all these decisions were made by people who knew what they were doing. They weren't made by some agency, some politician. From the time we thought the balloon catheter, the time we used it, it was about 5 weeks.
Wow.
You had to try to get that done now, it'd probably be
It's impossible, yeah.
It'd probably be 5 years.
Wow.
That wouldn't be unusual.
Tom, when you first used this embolectomy catheter, who was manufacturing this? Was this the Tom Fogarty manufacturer, or was someone else doing it for you?
No, I did it myself for about 2 years when I was training in Oregon, in my room.
Okay. Now, who got you associated with Edwards?
Al Starr.
But you had tried other manufacturers, and it bounced off.
Anybody that made a catheter or made a balloon, and there weren't many people that made balloons back then, I tried. And, you know, it's a kid, essentially, acting like a surgeon. And they said, this is crazy. That kid doesn't know what he's doing.
Well, the early reception for the presentation of this idea of the embolectomy catheter was not exactly favorable. Here's a quote from Dr. William Altmeyer, a very prominent surgeon at that time, who said, "A dangerous and inappropriate procedure. Only one so inexperienced and uninformed as a student would dare think of this." Is this true?
It's absolutely true.
The fact that it was inappropriate. No, the fact that this is, to me, a glaring example of what you and I have talked about in the past about perhaps academia being in the way from time to time, being in the way of new ideas.
Yeah, and I think that's even truer in this day and age with many academic medical centers, simply because this concept of conflict of interest. You know, many academics view industry as the evil empire. They're there to contaminate the academic mission. and anybody associated with them is also bad. And fortunately, that's not all, but certainly the most prestigious ones, like Harvard, Stanford, they have that attitude. It's based usually on the attitude of the dean.
Really?
You know, things come top down. You know, those guys pay you. You usually do what somebody tells you to do when they're paying you.
So that segues into our next big focus area, would be innovation. And I think
Yeah.
talking about your Fogarty catheter is a perfect introduction to this. Now, you were young when you developed this. You did obtain intellectual property on this,
Yes.
and you protected it, and you then licensed this out to Edwards. How did you learn how to do all of that? Because we don't get that training in surgery.
Well, I got a very early lesson. The workshop thing, it became obvious that they owned that intellectual property. And so I started.
The clutch?
The clutch.
The clutch.
Yeah, they owned it because I did it in their shop. And so at least I learned something firsthand. And then Dr. Cranley mentored me with the balloon catheter. Says, Tom, you got to patent this. And I did.
Did you patent it on your own?
Yes. No, not on my own. I had an attorney do it. And this is unusual for an attorney, but he actually patented it and said, pay me later.
Oh my.
Yeah, that's what I say. Wow. I think you will not get any attorney to do that now. I'm sure there's one, but I wouldn't spend any time looking for him.
Wow. So you obtained the patent, but then the whole issue of licensing this out to Edwards, how'd you learn how to do that and all those negotiations and dealing with the contracts?
You know, pretty much I did that on my own.
I mean, how do you know that you got a good deal?
I got a real good deal. Everybody was amazed. Usually you get a royalty of about 2 to 5%. I got a 10% royalty.
But how did you learn all this again? And I'm addressing this more to the young surgical inventors out there who don't know this information. How would they go about learning all that?
Well, ask questions, and that's what I did. I used to mow a lawn for an attorney, and I'd ask him questions.
That's great. And what about the government? When were your first dealings with, for example, the FDA? Was it over the embolectomy catheter or over another device?
No. The first dealings really occurred when we were developing the tissue valve, and they were not responsible for regulating devices. So what I learned, they were going to pass the 510K aspect of the regulation, the whole from 510K to no 510K to IDE to PMA. And it was obvious that a valve would be in that. And actually, I consulted with the FDA when I was at the NIH about the classification of devices. Because they didn't know. The first guy was a guy by the name of Kennedy. He ended up being a dean at Stanford when I got back there. But so I knew what they were going, and we got this tissue valve, and so we had to get it done before it came into place, we felt. And we did.
And you got that as a 510K?
No, we got it as nothing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I learned about the FDA, and essentially I learned through that experience, one at the NIH, and then with development of the Hancock valve.
Tell us about the Hancock valve.
Well, Hancock valve, Hancock was actually a marketing guy for the balloon catheter with Edwards. And he, because of the emboli issue, he was thinking about how can we avoid this. And the concept of a tissue valve, I think, was being considered, but first it was cadaver, human valve. And that started somewhere in Europe, and then that's what Chumway did for a long time. And that was before I got back to Stanford. So anyway, the concept was I asked a bunch of surgeons, what would you consider acceptable in a term, what valve would you use, and what percentage of emboli would you tolerate? And they said, well, I'd like to see none. I said, okay, what would satisfy you? They said less than 5% or less, 5% or less. So anyway, what could do this was, because of the experience with the human cadaver valve, where the embolization rate was very low, use a animal valve. And so I did a lot of those implants back at the NIH. And then by that time, we had it pretty well developed and ready for sale. And so first utilization was at the NIH, and then from there, when I got back to Stanford, I started using them back there.
Fabulous. So while we're on the topic of innovation, you have an institute.
Yes.
Tell us about your institute.
Well, it's a not-for-profit Institute for Innovation, and what created it was dissatisfaction, actually, with what was going on at Stanford relative to regulation. Not necessarily FDA, but they had so many regulations you couldn't do anything. And if you're going to get it done, it'd take a year just to get permission to do it. So that's very frustrating when you really think you have something better that's going to benefit patients. And one of the experiences with the dean made me do cases that referred to me, do them down at UCLA Harbor. So a patient would go down, I'd go down, we'd do the surgery with Rod White down at UCLA Harbor. And I said, this is crazy.
Why were you asked to do that?
The dean is unrealistic. He's not a clinician, and he felt it was inappropriate because I may receive a fiscal benefit to have me do those patients.
Back to conflict of interest issues.
Yeah. And what they suggested, and this is true, well, have somebody else do it. Nobody had ever done what we were doing except Perotti.
Yeah.
So they wanted me to, patient refer to me, and then they say, you can't do that. And then they're saying, send it to some guy who doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that you had full disclosure with all your patients.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, when you tell them I'm going to make money off this, they say, well, that's great. You must know what you're doing. They do. And they would. They'd tell, I invented this. I'll make money off of it. And my conclusion would be, he knows what he's doing.
Absolutely.
So back to your institute then. You founded this institute with, what's the main purpose and goal of your institute?
The main purpose is to help physicians and engineers get a product onto the market. Okay, and we do that in many different ways. We have a lot of people that have been involved in medical devices for years and years. Attorneys, corporate attorneys, intellectual property attorneys, FDA experts, reimbursement experts, individuals that have been through the process of medical devices and they've been successful. And they all are pro bono, donate their time.
Wow.
We raise money, and we can help these applicants with some money. It's not a lot of money, and that money comes from grateful patients. It comes from some people are just interested in medical technology. It comes from some of the companies that I've worked with and others have worked with in the past. And so that's the way we work.
So if somebody has an idea, let's say I have an idea and I come to you, how would it work? Or are the ideas more born out of the institute?
No. The way they work, they come to us and we have a group of people that know technology. They know what's needed in the medical arena. And if we don't have the expertise at hand, then some of the staff members will call and ask them to come in and help us evaluate the technology, like things that we wouldn't know about. It's mostly surgeons, vascular surgeons, and cardiac surgeons. But we have a lot of opportunities to help people with another technology that could be in urology.
So I would assume it would be best if it was an early idea that, for example, another university didn't already have ownership of. It'd probably be best to go to your institute early with the idea?
See, there's different components of universities. There's the dean's domain, and then there's an intellectual property domain, and there's a licensing office. And actually, the licensing group at Stanford is very, very good. Mm-hmm. And they've established a lot of their wealth based on that group allowing people to develop technology that came out of the university. Hewlett-Packard. Many, many others. And so they're grateful and they make a contribution. We see students in a program out of Stanford, bio-design program, and I think half the guys that come in needing help, we take in. So see, Stanford is not, the medical school is not necessarily, or any of the schools, not necessarily interested in commercializing. I mean, commercializing is the hardest thing to do.
Yes.
You know, innovation, really, the first step is imagination, and the last step is commercialization. It does no good for anybody unless you can commercialize technology. And that is a very difficult step unless you've been through it. And Stanford is not good at it. Most universities are not good at it.
Yeah.
So they are very open to say, give us a royalty and a percent of the company and do what you will. And we hope you're successful, because they will be successful. And that is what Stanford was founded on years ago, that approach.
So what do you think, I mean, this is a kind of grandiose question, but what do you think the single most important element is to innovation?
Well, stick with it. You're going to be discouraged by many
So perseverance.
people. Perseverance. You got to stick with it.
Yeah, that's important. What is your idea on team and about teams to getting things done?
Well, first to recognize, very often the most difficult member of a team is the surgeon. And that's really true. They think, and they have been in charge of most everything. So they'll tell people what to do because they're in charge of everything. Well, they don't understand that to do what we need to do, you need a lot of different input from different people in different walks of life, engineering, so many things that it's just impossible to do anything without a good team. And, you know, good team is essentially no assholes.
So on that note, I know you also have some thoughts on committees. I believe you may use the word committeeism a bit. And
Yeah.
let me ask you, what's your favorite type of committee?
The committee that I'm on that gets rid of the other committees.
And I think I might have heard you refer to meeting-itis before.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on meetings and the point of meetings?
Well, I've yet to figure out what the point of a meeting is. Now, I don't mind sit-down talks, but when you go to a meeting or you're on a committee, you got to think, what do you come out of there with? It's usually nothing. You don't even have the date of the next committee meeting because nobody has brought their calendar. The other thing they come out of there with is a subcommittee. And those on the subcommittee were not at the committee meeting where they created the committee. I mean, it's,
So I take it the Fogarty Institute doesn't have many meetings or many committees.
they don't use the words.
Now, what about your ability or anybody's ability to spot technology that might actually work? How do you do that?
You know, I often give stupid answers. You just do it. It's really not a stupid answer. And people go off and say, well, how did you get started? You just start. That's how you get started. Now, you may not start the right way, but by getting started, you'll get a better concept of what is the right way.
And I would say listening to you earlier, just paying attention, sounds like that is important in your career. Paying
Yes.
attention to what's going on around you.
Yes. You know, I think a lot of surgeons, I know they're really good surgeons, they have a total awareness, and yet they're able to focus. And I think that is a gift, and it's very important, though.
Yeah. What about the costs of innovation? Is it actually feasible in today's day and age?
Well, no, it isn't. And so what you have to do is go offshore. And that's what's happening. People go offshore to innovate.
How's that going to ever change?
Well, it's going to be difficult. And yeah, I was always at odds with the FDA, and I still am. But of all things, they asked me to be a consultant. And I was encouraged to that because they finally recognized they got a problem.
Now, wait a minute, Tom. Have you sold out to the FDA?
No.
But yet you're employed by the FDA.
You know, you have to be. Or else, if you're not, it's a conflict of interest. True. I mean, I say, well, you have to pay me. And they say, oh, yes, we do. I haven't sent them a bill, though.
Interesting, interesting. So let's talk about the last major area that we wanted to focus on here. You are this amazing innovator, vascular surgeon. You've had your hand in so many things. And then we now know that there's a Fogarty winery.
Yeah.
How on earth did that come about?
Well, you have to understand that wine is not just an alcoholic beverage. It's a health food.
So it should be in all health stores.
That's right. And we ought to be able to make a prescription out and get paid for it.
So you've been a wine connoisseur, I take it,
No,
for many
I
years?
am not. No, I don't know shit about wine. No, I don't know that much about wine. I know what I like, and I know what I don't like, but I'm not I hate connoisseurs. They intimidate with their language and with their swirling of wine and gurgling and shit like that. They intimidate people.
So then wait a minute. When did you form your winery?
1981.
1981. And why? Why did you get into wine?
Well, I tried apples first, so
Really?
yeah. And there's not a very good market in apples.
Did you do this more out of your interest in wine, or did you do this more as an interesting business venture?
Both. Yeah. First of all, if people, particularly those tax people, if they find you're doing things only for pleasure, it's not very good. They'll tax you. Mm-hmm. So you make it a business. But I was interested in the business.
Running a winery is no small task. I mean, so how did you go about doing this?
Yeah, I hired people that did it, and I took credit for it.
All right.
No, and they're very good people. The average tenure up there is about 18 years.
And do you think you're going to, the Fogarty Winery and Vineyards are going to go on in perpetuity?
You know, I would hope so, but that's up to my children, really. They should do what makes them happy.
Well, it's very nice wine, I have to say.
Oh, good.
An item that I've been interested in for most of my adult life that I've always had trouble with, and you may be able to shed some light on this. All of us seem to be impacted by a limited amount of time. You have had an amazing ability to juggle multiple activities, jobs, multiple jobs when you're in college, medical school, all these balls up in the air at one time, various roles. So what are your secrets? What's the secret sauce here? How do you maximize your time?
I maximize my time by getting myself associated with good people. And that's the only way you can do this, if you're going to be multifaceted. And sometimes I pick them right, sometimes wrong.
But Tom, you didn't do this in medical school when you held 3 jobs, or high school, or college, or
Well,
how did you do these things?
I'll tell you one example. I developed a scrub nurse service for at night, because a lot of the hospitals want to call standard personnel in at night because they had to pay more. So I was a scrub nurse, and I would get called, and then I'd have other physicians, not physicians, students, medical students, or people that were scrub techs, and I'd put them on call. So if I had 2 things going, I'd call one of those guys to come in and take that other opportunity. So I've used people all my life.
So you didn't have more than 24 hours a day.
I did not. I did in that sense, yeah. But, you know, it made sense. They had an opportunity to make some money. It was a good experience, and it worked.
Now, here's an individual who's clearly a loner, but yet you were able to organize a team effort. So many things in your life don't seem to balance out. How can that be?
People have asked me that question, and even psychologists have asked me some of these questions. And what I do is when something's going on, I'm usually not part of the crowd, whether it be a social environment, whether it be an environment surrounding a meeting. I just sit and listen and watch.
Okay.
You know, before I really begin to engage. And I think that's important.
Yes, it is.
It's critical you take everybody's input, even things that sound stupid.
Do you happen to know what your Myers-Briggs personality type is?
Who?
Okay, no. No,
No, I know the psychologist came up with that shit.
I wonder if you're an ENTJ. I know. But no, that's important.
I think it would be correct to say that you've gotten massive recognition for your activities, hundreds of publications, book chapters, awards. The latest award being the National Academy of Inventors, a newly established fellowship membership. Why you? Why were you so different?
I asked that same question. I really do.
Well, let me ask it another way. With all this recognition, there had to have been disappointments, even failures.
Sure, but I've never sought out any recognition. Like some guys spend their whole life wanting to be the president of the SVS or something. Guys spend their whole life trying to be dean. I've never really sought out much of anything. I was more interested in solving problems, and I think when you do that, you're acknowledged if you solve them, you know, and that's enough. But you know, we take awards too seriously. I think they're nice. I feel good when I get one, but really, they're like hemorrhoids. You hang around long enough, every asshole gets one.
That's true. But now, back to the point of disappointment. 3 arch partners.
Yeah.
Was that a disappointment?
Yes and no.
Did you get fired?
I think I did.
Well, how did you, at the Stanford Dean,
Yes.
that had to be a disappointment.
No, absolutely not.
How did you handle disappointments or superficial failures?
Yeah, I just go on to something better. You know, to be in an environment that is distasteful really paralyzes one. To say I can't do what I know I can do and I'm trying to do something that's going to benefit somebody and people get in your way. When you get out of that environment, you feel so good.
Liberated.
Yeah, you liberate and you go do what you want. And that was the origin of the Institute for Innovation.
I think it's tremendous.
Well, I do too. And I'm proud of that.
Should be.
Well, Tom, you spent some time in Oregon.
Yes.
Have you come across Charlie Dotter?
Charlie Dotter, they called him Crazy Charlie.
Yeah.
Well, he knew I developed that balloon catheter. So when I got back there as an intern, the first thing he did is seek me out. He said, because he used ramrods to open up an artery. He just shoved a dilator down there. And so they'd always clot or they'd bleed. And I got a lot of experience with a balloon catheter, taking those clots out and sewing up the holes that he made. Anyway, I did it because I like to do it, and I get good experience with doing it. And there's a combination of surgery, because I had to close the hole that was usually big enough hole to need a graft sometimes. I couldn't do it in surgery because Dunphy found out that I was working with him. And he called me in his office and he said, "Tom, if you want to finish this program, you stop working with Charlie Dotter." So anyway, whenever he had a problem, I would take care of it in the patient's room at night.
Oh my.
That's the only way I could do it. We didn't have any infections that I know of.
Well, I want to come back to, we all submit articles to journal,
Yes.
and not long ago, Parodi was here, and he told me his paper was submitted and rejected.
Yes.
And you, Fogarty catheter, was
Yeah.
rejected until SGNO picked it up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it was.
what's your reaction to it? When
You know, I felt bad. I thought maybe I haven't done something good, and I was rejected by 3 journals, not just one. And it came back, different things. It's inappropriate. One said this is dangerous. We don't publish things that are dangerous, and so no, that was hurtful. But it didn't discourage me.
Goes back to perseverance.
Yeah.
I think there's something wrong with the peer review system.
You are absolutely right.
You look at SGNO, I know, Loyal Davis,
Yeah.
he's the editor. He have an editorial board, but editorial board doesn't do anything. Loyal Davis is the chairman of Northwestern. He is the one decide which paper to go
Yes.
for publication.
Yeah.
And he is the one that pick your paper.
Was that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That's how SGNO work. Loyal Davis is the only person decide which one to get published. He doesn't like people in Wesley, like me, you know. I would never get on the SGNO because from Wesley is out.
Well, you know, it's interesting. We were discussing this before. People say, well, what's the biggest problem you have with innovation? And it really is displacing the old concepts, the old habits, the old associations.
That's true.
And they can be real barriers. So the fact is, you know, if we don't change, we'll never improve anything.
I just can't believe, you know, the 2 of the biggest invention, the Fogarty catheter and Parodi's aneurysm and the vascular aneurysm. I mean, these 2 are the really major advance, and yet they didn't make the cut in the first try. I can't believe it.
Well, I can't. After I've had that experience. No, I was really disappointed. Dr. Cranley was disappointed, and probably more than I was.
I'd like to change subject to philanthropy.
Yes.
I was involved with the foundation of the society before,
Yes.
and you have played a very major part in philanthropy. We are
Yes.
not supposed to name who gave what, but you did make a major part in philanthropy. What's your idea about that?
Philanthropy?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have a good experience with the, it was the SVS? What was it?
It could have been SVS.
Well, one of them.
When it was the AVA?
I don't know. That's
The Life Foundation.
Lifeline Foundation. You know, I made the donation based on they do clinical research to the exclusion of basic research. Well, once they got the money, they used it wherever the hell they wanted. And that was not my intent. But that's what happened. So I'm very careful where I give money now, making sure that the money that I give goes to what I want. So it's a learning experience.
Are you planning any future giving?
Not to the SVS.
I'm trying.
But I do have to add that people like myself, my careers have benefited directly because of your philanthropy. So I was a recipient of one of the Lifeline K08 matching components. So I actually owe much to you, and you may not have known that. So I'm grateful. I am incredibly grateful.
I appreciate that you're grateful.
And from my basic research and translational research, I have actually grown into clinical research. So that might be good for you to know.
It's very good for me to know.
Philanthropy is American spirit.
Yes.
You don't see it in other countries.
Not too often. I'm sure there's some that do, but I don't see it too often.
You don't see it. This is something very unique in this country.
Yes, yeah.
And I just hope everybody keep this up, because that's really something very, very nice about it.
Yeah, well, that's where a lot of the money comes from for the Institute for Innovation and Philanthropy, both on my part but many others, which is, it's still around. It's not as much because of the economic climate, but it's there.
I'd like to ask you about your hobby. I remember you had some big animal in your, when I visit you, you had some animal jumping around.
Oh, it's a bobcat.
Bobcat, yeah.
Yeah.
You still have those?
The lady bobcat's still there. The boy
The boys.
went off somewhere else. No, I didn't know this, but cats have a very high incidence of kidney stones. And they die of uremia.
I know you like fishing.
Yeah,
He's a fisherman there.
he is not a fisherman. He gets on a boat and he pukes.
Just a little bit, just a little bit. Any other hobbies, Tom?
Fishing and bird hunting.
Wow.
Yeah, and playing with my grandkids.
Tom, I'd like to go backwards in a way to talk about yourself a little bit. There have been many descriptive phrases used for Tom Fogarty. I want you to pick out some that might be true and may not be true. Phrases such as maverick, marches to a different drummer, marches to his own drummer, poor student, better fisherman than a scholar. Tom, how do you see yourself?
The same way. You get an asshole to that also.
Who did you model yourself after, Tom?
Well, many people, primarily Dr. Cranley. I died too young. My father didn't have much of an influence at all. So it was really Dr. Cranley. I think he had 10 kids, and I essentially was 11th one.
And maybe his favorite.
It could be, actually. He said to me once, "I wish my kids were more like you."
God, what a compliment, Tom. What a fabulous compliment.
Jack he was a wonderful guy.
He was.
He was.
Yeah.
And we have a final series of questions that are really just opinions. You don't have any trouble offering an opinion, do you, Tom?
Oh, I have a hard time dealing with that.
My first question is, what's your favorite car? And it can't be the Cushman motor scooter. What's your favorite car? What do you drive?
What do I drive? I drive a truck.
What's your favorite car?
Oh, shit, I don't know. I guess I buy what my wife tells me to buy. Okay, so.
Hey, nice answer. Let's leave it at that.
The SVS and ISCVS merged together. What's your opinion on that?
I think they should have done it about 10 years before they did. You know, to separate, quotes, one was academic, so they say, and the other one were practitioners. and it was kind of a separation, those personalities should understand one another. And they didn't, and I don't think they still do. But to put that at a societal level, at least there's a chance they could understand one another. You know, you had the rat doctors on one side and the human doctors on the other side. And it made no sense. Both bring benefit, but they should understand one another.
Without the international component, you think that affect the international exchange?
I don't know if it did or did not. You know, there are two other societies vying for that same international presence, and that's not good. I think they should, once again, combine. You know, from cost standpoint, it makes more sense, and you'll get more support from industry.
Yeah.
So you got to be practical about what we're doing.
What are your thoughts on the future of endovascular surgery?
Well, I think it's do nothing but go up. We'll figure out more ways to do these things better. It'll be catheter mediated. I think we're going to have some technology that's going to be transcutaneous. It's probably going to be some forms of energy that you can use in doing that. It's already being done with tumors, you know, with X-ray therapy. And Gamma knife and the cyber knife are two great examples. The cyber knife has an accuracy of 1 millimeter. Well, think about it. Ablating something and not having any punctures or incisions or anything, and you can repeat it. So that is going to be our future, that with imaging.
What's your opinion on independent vascular board?
I think it's bullshit.
Should we stay as we are? That's a
You know, I don't know what you mean. See, I don't think we're really independent of anybody, nor should we be. I also think that we can get so focused that we lose our appreciation for what is going on in other areas. And that's dangerous. I mean, got so focused on our techniques, and we had to do that, and it was the right thing to do, but we got to get out of that. I mean, we used to have presentations, I did so many of these and that, but we never really found, they did it and it lived, and you put down the complications, but you really never knew what you really did beyond a year. So we got to do more in that area, and I think it's critical to do that. And we've ignored that. And the NIH hadn't supported any clinical research. And I think we need basic research, but not to the exclusion of clinical research.
And Tom, as you and I have discussed before, U.S. medical care has now become a political football, which is so unfortunate. Do you think we've lost our way? Is there any way out of this in which we can provide good medical care?
Yeah, I do believe there is, and I think we can do it at less cost. And I think that patients should bear a lot of responsibility for their own care. And when you take care of everybody at no cost, it's not going to work. I mean, it's that simple. And if we don't have our patients responsible for their own bodies and their own health, it ain't going to work. But the more you give free care, the more you're going to keep giving free care. The patient should be responsible for their health.
Tom, let me ask you about a specific part of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. One of the most onerous aspects of this is the Sunshine Act. In this portion of this Affordable Care Act, everything a drug company or a medical device maker provides to a physician must be disclosed. What effect do you think this is going to have on medical innovation?
It's going to be real bad.
It's going to be terrible.
Yeah, no, it's going to be horrible. I tell you the problem with the perspective of many in medicine, and mostly coming from academic centers, is that if you make money off of something, it's bad. I don't think that is the American way. I think the Americans should feel, and many do, that if you benefit somebody, you should be rewarded.
Right.
And it happens in every other arena. The singers get paid a shitload of money. Other entertainers get all kinds of money. We preserve limb and life. And they somehow think that those who develop the technology to help in that effort are evil and shouldn't be paid. And if they are paid, they're even worse than evil.
Yep.
Well, it's kind of very destructive.
Yes, it is.
Well, on that note, let me ask you a final question. What parting advice would you give to young surgeons?
Patient-centric. We got to keep thinking that our obligation is to the patient. It's not, our obligation is not to the institution. It's not to the government. And I think we've lost that concept along the way. And that concept has been encouraged by some people that shouldn't be doing it. It's not thinking about what grant you're going to get next. It's not thinking about what award you're going to get next. So I think we have to really focus on we're here to take care of patients and other things come second.
Tom, thank you for this interview. Speaking for SVS, it's greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you.
Thomas J. Fogarty. National Medal of Technology and Innovation to Thomas J. Fogarty, Fogarty Institute for Innovation, for innovations in minimally invasive medical devices.
In the spring of 2019, Dr. Fogarty was honored by the American Surgical Association with the Medallion for Advancement of Surgical Care, which recognizes seminal contributions in surgery that establish new paradigms.